The city of Grayhaven never truly slept because its streets glowed with neon signs, hot pipes, and constant fear. On the east side, bright towers rose over clean roads and strict lawkeepers, while on the west side, old factories, broken bridges, and black smoke covered whole blocks in rust and noise. People lived between those two worlds and learned one simple rule very fast. If the lights above you flickered, then something below you was waking up. Everyone in Grayhaven feared the same name in different ways, and that name was Vance. He was a man tall and lean, with silver-white hair that fell across one sharp eye, and he wore a dark coat lined with glowing threads that looked like trapped lightning. Vance could forge living light into solid shapes, then shatter that same light into violent bursts. He used that power for money, for revenge, and sometimes for no reason that anyone could understand. He hated the lawkeepers because they hunted him, and he hated the rebels because they wanted to use him. Still, when the first tremor rolled through the underground tunnels, the whole city needed him more than it knew. That tremor was not natural, and the truth behind it was worse than panic. A machine empire hidden under the streets had begun to wake a colossal titan made of old steel, stone, and sealed energy. If the titan rose fully, the tunnels would collapse, the districts would tear apart, and Grayhaven would be crushed under its own buried weight. Vance knew the danger first, because he could feel living light shiver in the walls like a warning pulse. He also knew that if he stopped the awakening, the city would survive, but the people in it would keep hunting him forever. If he let it continue, chaos would spread, and in that chaos he might finally rule something instead of running from it. That choice sat inside him like a blade from the first moment of the story. Vance moved through the West District before sunrise, where the air smelled like oil, rain, and burned metal. Broken signs flashed over narrow streets, and guards watched rooftops with hard eyes. He met his contact in a loading yard beside a stacked wall of empty crates, and her name was Mira. Mira was a woman, young and quick, with black hair tied into a short braid, and she wore a red jacket over scavenged armor that looked too light for real war. She was not a warrior by nature, but she was smart, brave, and desperate to save her little brother, Eli, who had vanished near the lower tunnels 2 nights earlier. Mira had found old map marks, strange power readings, and a symbol stamped into the metal doors below the city. She believed the machine empire had taken Eli and many others to use them as labor for something deep underground. She needed Vance because no one else could break into those sealed levels. Vance listened without kindness because kindness was not his habit, but he understood the logic right away. The same force that was waking the Titan had also been moving people under the city like parts in a machine. Before he could answer, lawkeepers dropped from the rooftops around them. Their leader was Captain Cole, a man with a heavy build, short brown hair, and a calm face that hid a dangerous mind. Cole wore white armor with black lines and a bright badge on his chest, and he wanted Vance alive because the city council believed Vance could be turned into a weapon. Cole also wanted Mira arrested because her searches were making public fear worse. He did not think he was evil. He believed Grayhaven could only survive through control, and he believed Vance was too dangerous to walk free. The first clash in the yard was sharp and fast. Vance raised his hand, forged a blade of pale light, and cut down a rain of stun nets without touching a single guard. Cole ordered his team forward, and the yard filled with smoke, shattered crates, and bright flashes. Vance could have escaped alone, but Mira saw a tunnel seal behind the guards, and she shouted that the symbol matched the one on her brother's last message. That detail changed everything. Vance shattered a wall of light under the gate, slammed it open, and pulled Mira through before the lawkeepers could close in. He did not do it for her, and he did not do it for the city. He did it because the symbol was the first real proof that the awakening was bigger than a rumor. Down in the tunnel, they found a chamber with rails, pulsing cables, and rows of sleeping work pods. The pods were empty now, but the machines around them were still warm. Someone had moved people out only minutes earlier, which meant the machine empire knew they were coming. The deeper they went, the more Grayhaven changed around them. The tunnels became old transit lines with walls lined by pipes, then private machine halls with iron doors, then a hidden undercity made of gears, magnets, and broken statues from a forgotten time. Vance learned the machine empire was not just a group of robots or workers. It was a human-led order built around one cold idea. Its ruler was Damien Vale, a man with slick black hair, pale skin, and a long silver coat that never seemed to collect dust. Damien believed cities were wasteful because people argued, lied, and broke things. He wanted the Titan awake because it could become a perfect engine of control, a force strong enough to crush resistance and unify Grayhaven under one machine command. He had spent years feeding power into the Titan using stolen light cores and captured workers, and he had reached the final stage. Damien also knew about Vance from the start. In fact, the story changed here in a way Vance did not expect. Mira had not only found the tunnel signs. She had been sent toward Vance by Damien himself because Damien wanted to test whether Vance would come willingly into the Undercity. Damien had believed that fear, anger, and pride would push Vance into becoming his enforcer. This was the twist hidden under the first half of the story. Mira was not a traitor by heart, but she had been forced into the middle of a trap after Damien threatened Eli and promised to reveal his location only if she guided Vance below. When Vance realized this, his anger turned colder because he understood that everyone near him was being used. Mira admitted the truth with shaking hands, and she did not ask for forgiveness. She only begged him to help her find Eli before the final machine's seal opened. Vance almost left her there because that would have been easier, but he saw something in her fear that looked too much like his own past. He had once been used by stronger people too, and every victory had left him more alone. So he kept going. They reached the lower vaults and found Eli and dozens of workers behind glass barriers, still alive, still trapped, and linked to a giant power ring around the Titan chamber. Eli was a small boy with brown hair, wide eyes, and a torn blue shirt, and he was brave enough to press his hand against the glass and smile when he saw Mira. That small moment gave the mission a new heart. This was no longer only about Grayhaven or Vance. Real people were tied inside the machine plan, and if the Titan woke, they would be the first to suffer. Vance shattered the glass with a controlled pulse, and Mira pulled Eli free. But Damien had already started the final sequence, and the whole underground city began to shake. The last part of the story became a climb through fire, steel, and collapsing light bridges. Lawkeepers and rebel fighters both arrived at the same time, each side hoping to seize Vance before the machines finished their work. The rebels were led by Sharon, a woman with blonde hair, a scarred green coat, and sharp eyes full of hunger. She wanted Vance captured because she believed his power should belong to the people, not to the lawkeepers and not to a machine tyrant. In her mind, using Vance was the only way to break Grayhaven open and reshape it. So even while the city began to break apart, she tried to surround him with her own fighters and force him to choose sides. Captain Cole, still determined to control the crisis, joined the same battlefield and ordered both groups to stand down. No one listened. The streets above split open, and a huge metal hand rose through the roadway, dragging sparks, dust, and whole slabs of stone into the air. The Titan had finally begun to rise. It was enormous, older than the city, and built with a hollow chest that held a glowing core like a second sun behind iron ribs. The sight froze people in place because they understood at once that no wall, no gun, and no law could stop that thing if it reached full height. Vance stood on a broken tower above the street, wind snapping his coat while living light gathered around his hands in clear white ribbons. This was where he changed. For most of his life, Vance had used his power to survive and to stay above everyone else. He did not trust cities, causes, or crowds, and he wanted the world to prove him right by falling apart. But as he looked down at Mira holding Eli, at Cole trying to hold a failing line, and at Sharon reaching for a power she did not truly understand, he saw a truth he had avoided for years. If Grayhaven collapsed, then the strongest would not rule it, only the cruelest would. Vance did not want to save the city because he loved it. He chose to save it because he refused to let monsters, human or machine, decide the future for everyone else. He lifted both hands, forged a lattice of living light across the skyline, and turned the towers into weapons and shields at once. He fired beams that cut through collapsing cranes, formed bright chains that wrapped the Titan limbs, and shattered light bursts that drove back waves of machine drones. The whole city lit up in violent layers of white, gold, and blue. Damien appeared inside the Titan core chamber through a huge open gate, watching from below with a cold smile, because he believed Vance was already helping him by forcing the final awakening into motion. Vance saw that too late to stop the sequence, but in time to bend it. He slammed a pure light spear into the Titan core vents, forcing the machine energy to overload sideways instead of upward. The Titan staggered, the skyline shook, and the battle spread across rooftops, bridges, and cranes like a storm made of metal and light. Grayhaven did not fall in that moment, but it did not stand safe either. It became a war zone of broken stone and burning signs, with Vance in the center, forced to keep fighting while the next choice waited in the dark below. And somewhere under the noise of the city, Damien Vale was still moving, still planning, and still reaching for the one thing Vance had not yet taken back. Grayhaven felt alive in the worst way, with smoke drifting through the streets, broken glass glittering on wet stone, and the steady sound of distant alarms echoing between tall buildings. The city was not dead, but it was badly hurt, and every block now felt like a place where one more strike could bring everything down. High above the avenues, Vance stood on a cracked rooftop with his dark coat snapping in the wind, his black hair damp with rain and ash, and his jaw tight as he watched the firelight move across the ruins. He was a young man with a tired face, clear gray eyes, and a stubborn heart that refused to give Grayhaven over to fear. What he wanted was simple to say and hard to do. He wanted to keep the city standing long enough to stop Damien Vale from taking the buried power below it. Damien wanted that same power for a very different reason. He believed the power under Grayhaven could obey only one strong will, and he meant to make that will his own. He had spent years preparing for this night, using lies, secret tunnels, paid fighters, and old city records to map the path to the vault hidden under the oldest district. If he claimed it, every gate, line, and shield in Grayhaven could become his weapon. That was why the battle mattered so much. This was not only a fight over a city, it was a fight over who would control the future. Below the smoke in the dark beneath the streets, Damien was still moving, still searching, and still one step ahead of the rest. Vance did not stand alone for long, because Lena climbed the fire escape beside him with quick hands and a steady breath, her blonde hair tied back tight so it would not catch in the wind. She was a sharp-eyed woman, a scout and messenger from the lower wards, and she cared about the people who could not escape the fighting. She had no power of her own, but she had courage, and courage mattered in Grayhaven more than anyone wanted to admit. Behind her came Marcus, a broad-shouldered man with short brown hair and a heavy shield strapped to his back, the kind of man who had spent his life protecting others and meant to keep doing it now. He had once worked for the city guard, but after Damien bought half the guard leaders with promises and fear, Marcus chose the harder path. He now wanted to save the civilians trapped in the streets below. Together, they brought bad news. Damien had not only sent fighters across the rooftops. He had opened the old maintenance routes beneath the city, and if he reached the vault first, he could use the buried machine called the Hartwell to flood the district with control energy and lock every escape route in place. Vance had heard rumors about the Hartwell before, but now the rumors had shape. It was not gold or treasure. It was an ancient machine built beneath Grayhaven by the first engineers, meant to power the whole city during blackouts and storms. Long ago, city leaders sealed it away after it began answering only to a voice stone, a small command device that could guide its power. That voice stone had been hidden because, in the wrong hands, the machine could turn every locked door, bridge gate, and transit line into a trap. Damien had found part of the key, and that changed everything. If he got the full stone, he could shut the city like a fist. Vance listened, then looked down at the burning streets, and the weight of the situation finally settled in his chest. He could keep fighting where he stood, or he could follow Damien below and gamble everything on a chase through the dark. The choice became harder when a shadow messenger arrived on the next rooftop, slipping out of the smoke with silent feet and a face hidden under a hood. She was a woman with straight black hair, pale eyes, and a slim frame wrapped in dark cloth, and she called herself Nora. She had worked for Damien once, not because she trusted him, but because he had a way of finding people when they had nowhere else to go. Now she had turned against him, and the reason was simple. Damien had promised order, but he only used people until they broke. Nora had seen the tunnel map, and she had heard him speak to someone below the city about the voice stone and about a second piece hidden in the old courthouse vault. That second piece, she said, would let the Hartwell recognize Damien as its master. Vance stared at her, trying to decide if she was a trap, but Lena stepped closer and saw the fear in Nora's eyes. The messenger was telling the truth, and the truth was worse than expected. Damien was not only reaching for power, he was trying to complete an old system that had been broken on purpose because the city founders had feared exactly this kind of man. The reveal cut through Vance like ice. If Damien found both pieces, he would not need to destroy Grayhaven. He could own it without breaking a wall. That was a much more dangerous kind of victory. Far below them, a tremor rolled through the ground and the streetlights blinked out one by one. The city had begun to react to the machine waking up. Marcus gripped his shield and said the lower roads would soon flood with locked gates and rising security barriers. Lena said the trapped families in the east blocks would have only minutes left if the routes sealed shut. Vance felt the battle pulling in two directions at once. He could chase Damien into the dark, or he could save the people already caught in the trap. That was the moment when he changed. Earlier, he had fought like someone trying to win a battle. Now he understood that he had to fight like someone protecting a home. He told Marcus to lead the civilians through the west service lanes. He told Lena to stay with the escape crews and keep the routes open as long as she could. Then he turned to Nora and asked the one question that mattered most. Did she know where Damien would go next? Nora looked toward the shivering skyline and answered that Damien always liked the oldest paths because old stone held secrets and old records held names. She said he would head under the courthouse first, then cut into the central vault line. Vance nodded once, then leapt from the rooftop into the broken web of scaffolds below, chasing the glow of failing streetlights and the deeper dark under the city. The tunnels under Grayhaven were colder than the streets, and they sounded different too, with every step turning into a hollow echo that rolled ahead like a warning. Pipes ran along the walls, cracked signs hung overhead, and water dripped through old stone channels that had not been used in years. Vance moved fast, guided by Lena instructions and Nora warning, while behind him the city kept shaking in slow, tired pulses. As he went deeper, he began to see signs that Damien had been there already. Security seals were sliced open. Patrol drones lay broken against the walls. Even the dust had been disturbed by a heavy rush of feet. Then he heard voices ahead, low and tense, and he stopped at the edge of a wide chamber beneath the courthouse foundation. Damien stood in the center of the room, tall and calm in a long dark coat, his brown hair swept back neatly, his pale face lit by the blue glow of the Hartwell control console. He looked less like a thief and more like a man at a desk, which made him more frightening. Around him stood two armored enforcers, both masked and silent, while the second key piece rested in a metal case on the floor beside a broken seal panel. Damien was speaking to the machine housing itself as if it were a loyal servant rather than a sleeping giant. He said Grayhaven had wasted its strength for too long. He said order required a single hand. He said fear was only useful when it made people obey. Then he saw Vance at the chamber edge and smiled as if he had expected him all along. Damien did not look angry. He looked relieved. That was the final and deepest twist of the night. Vance realized Damien had wanted him to come down here. The whole rooftop battle, the false retreat, the scattered fighters, and the broken streets had all been used to pull Vance away from the courthouse so Damien could open the vault without interruption. Vance had not been chasing Damien. Damien had been guiding him. Before Vance could speak, the chamber lights slammed on, metal gates dropped from the ceiling, and the Hartwell began to wake with a deep mechanical hum. Damien raised the key piece in his hand, and the machine answered. Vance tightened his stance, stared through the glare, and knew the next clash would decide far more than one room under one city. It would decide whether Grayhaven still belonged to the people above, or whether it would soon belong to the man standing calmly in the dark below. Grayhaven slept under a heavy night, but deep below its streets the air felt tense and old, like the city itself was holding its breath. The underground chamber was wide, cold, and built from dark metal and stone, with blue light glowing weakly from ancient panels around the Hartwell. Vance stood in the center of that light, rain still on his black hair, ash on his face, and tired eyes fixed on the machine that had just begun to wake. He knew the danger clearly now. If Damien Vale took control of the Hartwell, he could command the city power lines, shut down whole districts, and turn Grayhaven into a prison. Damien wanted that control because he believed order was more important than freedom, and because he thought the people above were too weak to save themselves. That made him dangerous not because he was loud, but because he was sure he was right. The chamber lights slammed brighter, and the glare cut across every wall like a blade. Metal gates crashed down from the ceiling with heavy force, sealing the exits with a hard clang that echoed through the room. Marcus, the broad guard with the scratched shield on his back, stepped toward Vance and planted himself between the machine and the lower tunnel entrance. He had short brown hair, a hard jaw, and a stubborn look that never left his face because he wanted one thing above everything else. He wanted to keep the city safe, even if that meant standing in front of impossible danger. Lena, the blonde woman with her hair tied back tight, darted to the side with quick, sharp steps, her blue eyes scanning every rail and every panel for a weakness. She mattered because she could read systems, spot traps, and think faster than panic could spread. Nora, the silent woman with straight black hair and pale eyes, moved like a shadow behind a support column, her dark hooded clothes blending into the dark edges of the chamber. She mattered because she had come through hidden tunnels and she had brought the warning that Damien was not here to bargain. He was here to take. Then Damien lifted the small carved voice stone in his hand, and the Hartwell answered with a deeper hum that rolled through the floor. Damien stood tall in his long dark coat, pale and calm, with brown hair neatly set and sharp features locked in cold focus. He wanted the machine because he believed the city needed a single ruler, and the old system beneath Grayhaven gave him the perfect tool. His motive was simple, and that made it worse. He did not want chaos, he wanted control. Vance moved first. He rushed left, boots striking the metal floor as a bright pulse flashed from the Hartwell and lit his gray eyes in blue. Damien did not flinch. He only turned his wrist and sent a wave of energy through one of the open control rails, making a section of the floor lock into place between them. Vance slid around it, came up low, and struck at Damien with a fast, direct attack meant to knock the voice stone away. Damien stepped back just enough to avoid the hit, then used the stone again, and a ring of blue light burst outward from the Hartwell housing. The wave shoved Vance back across the floor and forced him to catch himself with one hand. He rose at once, but now he understood the first cruel truth of the chamber. The Hartwell was not just a machine. It was listening to the voice stone, and the stone was obeying Damien as if it had chosen him. Lena shouted from the side that the machine was still linking its older systems together, which meant the chamber was opening access to the city grid. If Damien finished the link, the lower tunnels could feed power to the upper wards, and every district above could be trapped under his command. Marcus raised his shield and blocked a sweeping metal arm that had come alive from the wall, then drove it back with a grunting shove. Nora slipped through the moving shadows and cut the light cable at one edge, dropping one corner of the room into darkness. For a brief moment, the blue glow became uneven, and Vance saw a chance. He glanced toward Lena, and she understood at once. She pointed toward a side rail marked with old symbols and shouted that the Hartwell still had a manual release path, but it was buried under the active control layer. That was the twist no one expected. Damien had not brought the voice stone only to command the machine. He had also used it to seal the old safety systems behind a false command layer, so no one else could shut it down once it started. The hidden truth hit Vance hard because it meant Damien had studied the Hartwell for a long time, maybe longer than anyone in Grayhaven knew. Damien smiled faintly as if he enjoyed the moment of understanding. He said the city above had grown soft, that the lower ward workers had been ignored for years, and that the Hartwell would finally make Grayhaven strong. He claimed the people would thank him later, once they no longer had to fear hunger, outages, or the leaders who lied to them. But his words only made his motive clearer. He did not want to save the city. He wanted to decide who mattered inside it. Vance saw then that Damien was not fighting for justice. He was fighting for a world where only his will counted. The chamber shook again, and the Hartwell answered with a rising tone that made the metal underfoot tremble. Blue panels along the core lit one after another, and a heavy armature unfolded from the center with a grinding sound. Lena ducked behind a control block and shouted for everyone to keep Damien away from the core console, because the machine would fully lock in if it reached the next power stage. Marcus nodded once, then moved with all his strength to hold back a spreading barrier that was dropping from the wall. Nora darted low, reached the side rail, and began pulling open a hidden panel with quick hands and a focused face. Vance ran straight at Damien again because he knew the only path left was to force the man away from the voice stone. Damien met him with calm skill, stepping aside, striking with the stone, and sending another pulse that rattled Vance through the chest and drove him into a metal support. For one painful second the room blurred, then Vance looked up and saw something that changed everything. The voice stone was cracked. Light leaked from the fracture in thin lines, which meant the device was being strained by the Hartwell itself. The machine was not fully serving Damien, it was resisting him. That meant there was still a chance to break his control if Vance could last long enough. He pushed himself up, breathing hard, and called to Lena without looking away from Damien. Lena answered by slamming a panel open and ripping out a cable bundle that sparked blue at the ends. She told him the safety route needed a second key, and the second key had to come from the old central lock beneath the core rail. Marcus heard that and shouted that he would hold the line while they worked. He slammed his shield down, braced his feet, and forced the moving barrier back with a loud metallic crash. Nora slipped beside Vance, her black hair cutting across her hood as she pointed toward a narrow crawl space under the rail. She had the quiet certainty of someone who had survived too many dark places, and she mattered now more than ever because she had found the hidden route no one else saw. Vance understood the plan at once. One of them had to get under the active system, reach the manual release, and cut Damien off before the Heartwell completed its full awakening. Damien noticed the shift, and his cold expression sharpened for the first time. He raised the voice stone higher, and the room answered with a louder hum, but that sound was uneven now, as if the machine itself was beginning to argue. Vance made his choice. He left Damien for a heartbeat, sprinted along the side rail, and dropped into the crawl space just as another metal gate slammed behind him. Dust and cold air rushed past his face, and the tunnel under the machine shook with every pulse from above. He crawled forward on his elbows, guided by Lena and Nora as they shouted directions through the metal grating. Behind him, Marcus kept Damien busy with heavy shield blows and sharp steps that bought just enough time. Above, the Heartwell lit the chamber in deep blue flashes, and the shadows moved like living things across the walls. Vance reached the central lock at last, a round seal with old grooves and a thin ring of untouched metal around it. It was the hidden heart of the safety system, and it had waited here for years without being used. He pressed his hand to it, felt the machine pulse under his palm, and understood one last thing. Grayhaven had been built on old power, old fear, and old lies, but it still had a heart of its own. Damien had opened the battle, but he had not won it. Vance turned his head toward the open chamber, where Damien stood in the blue glare with the cracked voice stone in his hand, and Vance knew the next move would decide more than the machine. It would decide whether the city could still choose its own future, or whether the dark below would swallow it whole. Then the hidden lock began to glow, and the chamber fell into one long, waiting silence. The chamber stayed still for one long breath, and that stillness felt wrong. Blue light leaked from the hidden lock in thin lines, and it spread across the metal floor like cold water. Grayhaven was built above old machine tunnels, but this room sat deeper than most people ever knew, under layers of stone, rust, and forgotten fear. Vance stood with rain on his coat, ash on his face, and his tired gray eyes fixed on Damien Vale. Damien was a man with brown hair, sharp features, and a long dark coat that never seemed to wrinkle, even now. He held the cracked voice stone in one steady hand, and his cold, calm stare said he still believed he could control everything. Around them, Lena, Marcus, and Nora watched the glow grow stronger, each of them knowing the same hard truth. If Damien reached the Heartwell first, he could shape the power of Grayhaven for himself. If the hidden lock opened the wrong way, the dark below might surge through the city and leave everyone trapped inside a failing future. Lena was the first to move because she had always been the one who noticed danger before it struck. She was a woman with blonde hair tied back tight, alert blue eyes, and practical lower ward clothing built for long walks through wet tunnels and broken streets. Her short coat, utility straps, and scuffed boots made her look like someone who had spent her whole life fixing things other people had broken. She stepped beside Vance and stared at the crack in the voice stone. "That stone is not just a key," she said, her voice low but clear. "It is a guide. It can speak to the Heartwell, but only if the right person understands it." Marcus came next, broad and solid, a man with short brown hair and city guard gear scratched by battle. His heavy shield rode on his back, and his stance made him look like a wall that would not give way. He wanted order because he had seen what panic did to crowded streets, and he knew Grayhaven could not survive another collapse. Nora stayed near the shadows, a woman with straight black hair, pale eyes, and dark hooded clothing wrapped close around her slim frame. She moved like a silent shadow in the tunnels because she trusted observation more than noise. She had followed old routes under the city for years, and she had learned that every secret in Grayhaven had a reason for hiding. Damien smiled at them all, but the smile did not reach his eyes. He had begun this battle with careful words and a patient hand, and now his motive stood bare in the blue glare. He wanted the Heartwell because Grayhaven was failing in pieces, and he believed the city would tear itself apart if left to common voices and divided leaders. To Damien, mercy was weakness, and disagreement was a crack that would grow until the whole city fell. He believed one clear ruler could keep the power lines alive, keep the lower wards fed, and keep the upper wards from turning the city into a fight over scraps. That belief made him dangerous because he was not acting from simple greed. He was acting from fear, control, and pride, all mixed together until he no longer saw people as people. He lifted the voice stone and the cracked lines across it flashed brighter. "You still do not understand," he said. "This city was built to obey its heart. I am only asking it to remember who can lead." Then the hidden lock answered him with a deeper glow, and a low sound rolled through the chamber like a machine waking from a long sleep. The first twist came fast, and it struck harder than a blade ever could. Nora stepped forward from the dark, and she held up a thin metal strip taken from an old tunnel wall. On it were the same glowing marks as the voice stone, only arranged in a way that looked broken at first and then suddenly made sense. "The stone was split on purpose," she said. "Damien did not find the full command. He found only one half." Damien turned his head toward her, and for the first time his calm face tightened. Nora had found the hidden route beneath the chamber days before, and she had noticed that the old control system was designed for two voices, not one. The Heartwell was never meant to obey a single hand. It was built to answer two signals that had to match in both tone and intent, because the old makers feared exactly what Damien had become. They had locked the system so no one ruler could use the city like a weapon. That was why the hidden lock was glowing now. It was not opening for power alone. It was testing whether the people in the room could agree on a choice that protected Grayhaven instead of ruling it. Damien did not like that answer, so he did what controlling men always do when their plan breaks. He changed the shape of the room. He pressed the cracked voice stone against the control rail, and the blue panels around the Heartwell lit in a fast chain. Thick metal plates shifted, old vents opened, and cold wind rushed through the chamber. A deep hum rose under their feet, and the floor trembled as if a giant machine had turned in its sleep. Marcus moved at once, planting himself between Damien and the others. He pulled his shield free and braced it with both hands, his jaw set hard. "You are done," he said, not because he thought the fight was easy, but because someone had to speak like the line still held. Damien answered by snapping the voice stone down against the rail again, and a pulse of blue force pushed Marcus back one step. Not enough to break him, but enough to show how much control Damien still had. Lena rushed to the side panel and began turning old manual rings by hand because she knew the machine still had human locks beneath its glowing skin. Vance saw her plan in a flash. The Heartwell could not be forced open from one side alone. It needed balance. He grabbed the cracked stone from Damien with a fast move, but Damien was ready, and the two of them slammed into each other in the blue light, coat against coat, effort against certainty. Damien was stronger in control, but Vance was faster in the small spaces between danger. He held the stone tight, even as the chamber shook harder around them. Then the second revelation came, and it changed the meaning of everything. The hidden lock did not glow for Damien, and it did not glow for Vance alone. It brightened when Lena finished turning the manual rings, and when Marcus held the line, and when Nora placed the metal strip into a narrow slot hidden in the wall. The chamber answered all of them at once. A voice, old and distant, filled the room from hidden speakers inside the stone. It was not a human voice, but it was calm and clear, and it carried the memory of the people who built the Heartwell long ago. The machine explained its rule in plain words. Grayhaven had been built around shared command because the old rulers had once tried to take all power for themselves, and the city had nearly lost everything. So the founders divided control on purpose. One person could guide, but no one person could own the heart. Vance understood then why the city kept failing whenever strong men tried to seize it. The machine itself resisted control that came from fear. It opened only for trust. Damien heard the same truth, but he could not accept it. His face hardened and his voice turned sharp. He said trust was a luxury for people who had never watched a city starve in the dark. He said Grayhaven needed command, not debate. He said the lower wards would be crushed by delay. In his mind, he was still the only man willing to make the hard choice. That was his tragedy, and it made him more dangerous than a simple thief. He truly believed he was saving people. He only could not see that his idea of saving them would turn them into subjects instead of neighbors. Vance stared at him and felt something inside himself change. Before, he had fought Damien because Damien stood in the way. Now he fought him because he understood him. That understanding did not make Damien right. It only made the battle harder. Vance saw that leadership was not about being the loudest or the strongest. It was about carrying fear without handing it to everyone else. He looked at Lena, Marcus, and Nora, and for the first time he did not think of them as help. He thought of them as equals, each one holding part of the answer. The Hartwell then gave them one more choice, and the chamber began to open in layers. Blue panels folded aside with slow grinding sounds, and a deeper hall appeared behind the first ring of metal. Warm air moved up from below, carrying the old smell of stone, dust, and long unused power. Yet the path was not fully open. A second lock sat farther inside, larger and darker than the first, and it pulsed with a steady red line that meant danger or warning. Nora studied it and said the inner hall likely led to the main core of the Hartwell, where the city power could be restored or redirected. Lena said that if the core was damaged, Grayhaven could lose lights in the upper wards and water in the lower tunnels within hours. Marcus tightened his grip on his shield because he knew panic would spread faster than any enemy if that happened. Damien saw the same threat, but instead of stepping back, he stepped closer to the open hall. "Then we finish this now," he said, and his calm voice returned, colder than before. He was not beaten. He was adapting. Vance looked at the deeper lock, then at the crack in the voice stone, and then at the three people beside him. He realized the next step would not just decide who won this chamber. It would decide whether the city became one mind under control, or many voices working together through fear and trust. The inner lock began to hum louder, and somewhere beyond it, the true heart of Grayhaven started to wake. The chamber beneath Grayhaven felt colder now, and the old metal walls seemed to listen. Blue light from the Hartwell panels flickered across wet stone, broken rails, and the tense faces of the people standing in the dark. Above them, the city still groaned under rain and fear, but down here the real danger had finally shown its shape. Vance stood near the deeper lock, his black hair damp, his gray eyes locked forward, and his dark coat stained with ash from the long climb through the lower tunnels. Lena stayed close on his left, her blonde hair tied back tight, her blue eyes sharp, and her slim body held ready in practical lower ward clothing with straps and scuffed boots. Marcus stood on the other side, broad and solid, his short brown hair cut close, his guard gear scratched and worn, and his heavy shield shifting on his back as he watched every movement. Nora waited near the shadows, her straight black hair falling around a hooded face, her pale eyes calm, and her dark wraps making her look like a quiet piece of the dark itself. In front of them all stood Damien Vale, a man with brown hair, pale skin, and a clean dark coat that still looked untouched by the struggle around him. He had the same cold, confident face as before, but now his calm voice carried a harder edge. He was not beaten, he was changing the fight to suit him. He wanted the Hartwell not only because it was power, but because it could let one voice command the whole city. He believed Grayhaven was too scared and too divided to save itself, and he wanted to prove that only control could keep it alive. That was the true danger, and Vance understood it now. If Damien reached the core, Grayhaven would no longer be a city of people. It would become a city of orders. The inner lock answered with a deep hum, and the red line across its dark metal seam began to glow brighter. Thick rings within the lock turned slowly, as if something old and patient had been waiting for this exact moment. The voice stone in Vance's hand gave a small crackle, and the glowing lines across its dark stone surface pulsed in uneven waves. Vance looked at the crack in the device, then at Damien, and then at the others beside him. He saw the same truth in their faces. This was no longer about opening a door. This was about who would speak for Grayhaven when the machine woke. Damien lifted one hand, and his expression stayed calm, almost polite, as if he were explaining something simple to children. He said that fear already ruled the city, so it was foolish to pretend otherwise. He said the upper wards hid behind locked doors, the lower tunnels hid behind rumors, and every guard in Grayhaven made choices only after looking over a shoulder. He said the city needed one clean command, one clear will, and one mind to guide it. Vance knew that Damien was not lying about the fear. He was only twisting it into a reason to take everything. Marcus tightened his jaw because he had served the city long enough to know that order without trust always broke in the end. Lena looked at the lock and then at the city charts on the wall, remembering how many families depended on the Hartwell lines for heat, water, and light. Nora said nothing, but her gaze moved through the chamber like a knife, searching for hidden hands and hidden traps. Then the inner lock gave a louder sound, and all of them felt the floor tremble under their boots. Somewhere beyond that barrier, the true heart of Grayhaven was waking, and every second now mattered. Vance took a slow breath and studied the voice stone more carefully. The crack was not random. It split the glowing lines in a pattern that looked almost like a path. He remembered the older chamber doors, the lost control rails, and the strange pressure that had followed every time the stone was used. The machine did not only accept commands, it tested intent. It answered fear with resistance, and it answered balance with opening. That was why the stone had cracked earlier when Damien pushed too hard. The device was not made to obey hunger alone, it was made to judge the person holding it. Vance raised his eyes and asked Damien why he wanted the Heartwell so badly. The question cut through the chamber more deeply than any weapon could. Damien's smile thinned, and for the first time his voice carried a small trace of real feeling. He said that when Grayhaven was first built under the ground, the first leaders promised safety for everyone, but then the city grew into layers of locked doors, sealed records, and silent bargains. The old council used the Heartwell to choose who got power, who got work, and who got comfort, while the lower wards carried the weight. Damien said he had watched this divide for years. He had seen the city survive by hiding its cruelty, and he had decided that a single rule would be better than 100 fake promises. It was a twisted logic, but it was a real one, and that made him dangerous. He was not angry for no reason. He was trying to rebuild the city through force because he believed kindness had already failed. Vance felt the weight of that truth, but he also saw the flaw. A city cannot heal if its people are not allowed to speak. A command can move bodies, but it cannot build trust. And without trust, Grayhaven would break again. Lena stepped closer and spoke with a steady voice, reminding everyone that the lower wards had already carried enough pain from other people making choices above them. Marcus added that the guards were tired of being used as walls between the rich and the poor. Nora finally spoke too, her voice soft but clear, and she said that silence was how control grew roots in dark places. Her words hit the chamber like a cold wind. Damien turned his head toward her, annoyed now, because each of them had begun to name the thing he was trying to hide. Then the inner lock flashed red, and a deep mechanical voice rolled through the chamber from inside the Heartwell shell, low and ancient, as if the city itself had started to speak. The voice announced a final test, and the chamber lights shifted from blue to pale white. A ring of old control seams opened around the lock, and narrow paths of light moved across the floor toward each person. Vance understood at once that the machine was demanding a choice from all of them, not only from him. The Heartwell wanted a command built from shared intent, not from one stubborn hand. Damien noticed the same thing, and his calm face hardened for the first time. He reached toward the voice stone, but the cracked device flared and sent a sharp pulse through his fingers, forcing him back one step. That was the first clear crack in his control, and everyone saw it. Marcus moved fast, placing his shield between Damien and the center seam, while Lena bent low and studied the light patterns on the floor. Nora slipped farther into the shadows, where her black hair and hood vanished against the dark, and she listened for any hidden movement in the walls. Vance saw the answer in the patterns. The machine was asking for 3 things at once: truth, balance, and consent. He realized then why the old city had failed before. The council had always tried to force the Heartwell alone, which made the machine respond with lockouts, shutdowns, and dangerous surges. The city had never needed a ruler who could shout louder. It needed a group willing to share the burden. That was the twist waiting inside the chamber, and it changed everything. Damien had wanted the Heartwell because he thought one strong mind could save Grayhaven. But the Heartwell had been built by people who feared that exact kind of rule. They had hidden this deeper lock to protect the city from any one voice becoming absolute. Vance looked at his allies, and for a moment he felt the full weight of their fear, their doubt, and their hope. Then he understood what he had to do. He did not need to beat Damien with strength. He needed to answer the machine with a different kind of power. He lifted the voice stone, held it where all could see, and told the others that Grayhaven would only open if they chose together. Damien laughed once, but it sounded thin now. He said that trust was a weak dream. Vance answered that trust was harder than control, which was exactly why it mattered. So Vance asked Lena to speak first, because she knew what the lower wards needed to survive. He asked Marcus to answer next, because the guards needed to protect people instead of fear. He asked Nora to give the final piece, because the hidden paths and secret tunnels belonged to those who had always been forced to move quietly. Each of them touched the light paths on the floor, and the chamber responded at once. Blue veins along the Heartwell shell brightened in a steady wave, and the red glow in the inner lock began to pull inward as if the machine were breathing. Damien stepped forward again, trying to force his own command into the circle, but the cracked voice stone flashed between his hand and the core, blocking him. For one instant his mask broke, and Vance saw the true loss under all that control. Damien was afraid that if he did not seize the city, then the city would keep crushing people like him. That fear had shaped him for a long time, and Vance could understand it without forgiving it. The chamber shook harder now, and a deep section of the inner lock started to open with a harsh, metallic groan. Beyond it, the true heart of Grayhaven shone in a pale blue pulse, bright enough to stain every face in the room. But before the opening could finish, a second warning tone screamed from somewhere inside the machine network, and the floor under their feet split with thin lines of light. The old system was not simply waking, it was reacting to something else buried deeper inside. Vance stared into the growing light and felt a new chill rise in him because this was not the full answer. It was the start of a larger one. Damien noticed it too, and his eyes narrowed as if he had just learned that the city held one more secret than even he had expected. The inner lock opened another narrow inch, the Heartwell hummed like a giant waking beast, and Grayhaven waited on the edge of a choice that would decide everything still to come. The chamber under Grayhaven felt colder now, even with the Heartwell waking beside them, because the new light from the inner lock did not bring comfort, only warning. Blue glow slid over old metal walls, over wet stone, and over the tired faces of the people gathered there. Vance stood near the front with rain and ash still on his face, his black hair damp and his gray eyes locked on the narrow opening in the deeper gate. He was young, but he looked like someone who had already learned that every answer could hide a worse question. Damien Vale stood a few steps behind him, tall and still, his brown hair neat, his pale face calm, and his long dark coat hanging like a banner of control. Lena, with her blonde hair tied back tight and her blue eyes sharp with worry, watched both men at once. Marcus, broad and strong in scratched guard gear, kept one hand near his shield and his jaw tight. Nora, wrapped in dark cloth with straight black hair falling around her pale face, remained half in shadow where she always seemed most at home. The Heartwell gave one deep hum, and everyone knew the same thing at once. The machine was not done waking, and Grayhaven was not done paying for it. What lay behind the inner lock mattered because it could feed the whole city or break it open from the inside. Damien moved first because calm men often move when others are still trying to understand the danger. He raised the voice stone, the small dark control piece with glowing lines that had already opened one path, and he held it close to the seam in the inner lock. The stone answered with a low pulse, and the red line across the lock thinned another little bit. Vance stepped in front of him before the chamber could react again. He did not draw a weapon because this fight was not about blades or fists yet. It was about who had the right to decide the fate of everyone above them. Vance said Damien was moving too fast, and Damien replied that speed mattered when a city was starving, failing, and running out of power. He spoke with the same cold control he had used since the first day, and he made his motive sound clean. Grayhaven needed heat, light, water, and order. He claimed the old city leaders had hidden the truth too long, and now only one steady hand could keep the Heartwell from falling into panic and collapse. But Lena saw the flaw in his words right away. A man who wanted to save a city would ask the people to help. A man who wanted power would ask them to trust him first and understand later. Marcus heard the same danger in Damien's voice, and he planted himself beside Vance like a wall. Nora did not speak, but her eyes moved to the deeper seam in the lock, and she studied the dark line there as if it had a memory. Then the chamber answered them in a way none of them expected. The red line on the inner lock flickered, and for one brief moment the blue light from the Heartwell turned pale and thin, almost like breath on cold glass. A deep vibration rolled through the floor, and hidden rails along the walls clicked awake one after another. From narrow slits in the metal, old panels slid open, revealing symbols, wires, and a second layer of control paths that had been sealed for a reason. Lena gasped and moved closer because she had worked in lower ward repair crews and she knew old city systems when she saw them. This was not just a power lock, it was a test. Someone had built the Heartwell with a guard inside its own heart, and the inner lock was watching them now. Nora reached out and touched one of the exposed seams with 2 fingers, then pulled back as if she had felt a living pulse. She said the chamber was reading their choices, not just their commands. Marcus frowned and asked what that meant, and Nora finally spoke in her quiet voice, saying that the Heartwell would not only open for power, but for intent. If a greedy hand tried to seize it, the machine could seal deeper and trap everything below. That was the first clear twist in the story, and it hit them hard. The Heartwell was not a broken relic waiting for repair. It was a judgment machine built to decide who deserved to use Grayhaven's true core. Vance felt a chill go down his spine because he understood at once that Damien had not expected this. For the first time, the calm man looked truly surprised. Damien recovered fast, but the surprise left a crack in his mask. He said the city could not afford old fears and hidden rules, and he reached again for the voice stone. This time, however, the stone did not answer cleanly. The carved lines glowed unevenly, then sparked in a thin burst that forced Damien to lower it. He stared at it, and then at the inner lock, and the cold certainty in his eyes changed into something sharper. The truth was becoming clear. Damien had not simply found the voice stone by luck. He had sought it because he knew it belonged to the Heartwell, and he wanted the hidden core before the rest of the city understood what it could do. He had told everyone he was trying to protect Grayhaven from chaos, but he had also hidden the full purpose of the machine. He had wanted the Heartwell under his control before the people could ask where that control would lead. Vance saw it now, and so did Lena. The motive made sense in a terrible way. Damien believed order was worth almost anything, even secrecy, even fear, even taking power from the people he claimed to save. That belief made him dangerous because he was not lying for fun. He truly thought the ends justified the silence. Before Vance could answer, the chamber shook again, and a side passage behind them opened with a grinding sound. Cold air rushed out, carrying dust, metal, and the faint smell of old steam. From that passage came a lower ward messenger, a thin boy with a rain-dark coat and wide eyes who had followed the group through service tunnels and now stumbled into the blue light, gasping for help. He said the upper wards were already filling with panic because the old power lines were flickering on and off. Some people thought the Heartwell was about to fail. Others thought someone had begun a takeover of the city. Guards were running, families were hiding, and a crowd was gathering near the lift gates, ready to rush into the lower levels if the lights went out again. That news raised the stakes in one clean wave. This was no longer only about one chamber or one machine. Grayhaven itself was beginning to split under fear. Marcus swore under his breath because he knew what panic looked like in a crowded city, and he knew how fast it could turn ordinary fear into disaster. Lena asked how much time they had, and the messenger shook his head, saying maybe only minutes before the next power surge or collapse. Vance looked at the inner lock again and then at Damien. The choice was no longer private. Whatever happened next would reach every ward above them. Nora moved at last, and when she did, everyone paid attention. She stepped close to Vance and held out her hand, where a second pattern of light had appeared across her wrapped fingers. She explained that she had found something in the tunnels before they reached the chamber. Deep in the old service paths, the city builders had left markers for a fail-safe route, a hidden line that could redirect the Heartwell if the main control was seized. But the route was incomplete, and it needed someone to open the deeper chamber from the inside while another person rerouted the flow above. Lena understood the plan first because she was quick and practical. Marcus could hold the chamber entrance if trouble came. Nora could move through the tunnels and find the fail-safe path. Vance would have to stay near the Heartwell and decide what the machine should hear when the final lock answered. Damien heard the plan and smiled in a very small way because now the room had become a contest of skill, trust, and timing. He said Vance could play hero if he wanted, but the city would still need a leader when the dust settled. Vance felt anger rise, but it was clean anger now, the kind that helps a person stand straighter instead of tearing them apart. He told Damien that leadership was not the same as control. He said the people of Grayhaven deserved truth before obedience. For a moment, even the Heartwell seemed to listen. Then the inner lock opened another narrow inch, and the whole chamber brightened with a hard blue flash that cut every shadow into pieces. Deep inside the machine, something large shifted, like a giant turning in sleep. The floor gave one strong tremor, and old rails around the walls locked into place with a sharp metallic snap. A new display of pale symbols spread across the inner ring, and Lena shouted that the core path was active. That meant the next choice could not wait. Vance stepped forward, feeling the weight of the city above him, the fear in the lower wards, and the cold pressure of Damien standing right behind him. He finally understood the shape of the real conflict. Grayhaven had not simply been built around power. It had been built around a promise, and someone had hidden the terms of that promise long ago. If the wrong person claimed the Heartwell now, the machine could become a cage instead of a shield. Vance lifted his hand toward the glowing seam, and his voice stayed steady even as the chamber shone brighter around him. He said they would not let fear choose for them. He said they would open the truth, not just the lock. And as Damien looked on with narrowed eyes and Nora slipped into the tunnel dark and Marcus braced at the door, the Hartwell answered with one more low pulse, as if it had just begun to wake in earnest, leaving Grayhaven balanced on the edge of a far greater secret still waiting below. Grayhaven trembled under a heavy hush, and the chamber below felt even deeper than before, with cold stone walls, wet metal rails, and blue light moving softly through old panels like a living breath. The city above was still full of rain, tired lanterns, and crowded streets, but down here the world had narrowed to one chamber, one lock, and one choice that could change everything. Vance stood near the glowing seam with ash on his face and his dark coat hanging open, while Lena watched from one side with tight shoulders, alert blue eyes, and hands ready for the next surprise. Marcus stayed near the door with his heavy shield on his back, broad and solid as a wall, and Nora had already slipped into the tunnel dark, where her straight black hair and layered wraps disappeared between the shadows. Damien Vale stood apart from them all, tall and still, with brown hair neat against his pale face and a cold look that made the room feel smaller. He wanted control of the Hartwell because he believed Grayhaven was already failing, and he thought only one steady hand could keep the city alive when the old systems finally woke. That was the conflict from the start, and everyone in the room knew it now. If they opened the wrong thing, the city could lose its last source of power. If they trusted the wrong person, the machine below could belong to a man who cared more about command than truth. The Hartwell answered Vance with another low pulse, and that sound made the thin air shake in their chests. It was not a warning anymore. It was an invitation, and it was also a test. Vance kept his hand near the seam, and he did not look away from the glowing line. He had entered Grayhaven as a tired fighter with little more than grit and memory, but every step downward had changed him, because he had seen how fear could rule people faster than any blade or wall. Now he saw the same fear in Damien, only hidden behind calm words and careful posture. Damien did not shout. He did not rush. He spoke like a man who had already decided the answer, and that made him more dangerous than any loud enemy. He said the lower wards were already strained, the power lines were old, and the city could fail in a night if the Hartwell stayed asleep much longer. He said order was not cruelty, and control was not greed. He said truth was useful only if it helped keep people alive. Lena answered him fast, her blonde hair tied back tight as she stepped beside Vance, because she knew the lower ward better than anyone in the chamber. She said people needed more than a working machine because they needed to know who had hidden it, who had used it, and why the city had been fed careful lies for so long. Marcus lifted one hand from the door and added that a city built on fear would never stay strong, even if its lights came back on for one more season. Damien did not blink. Instead, he reached into his coat and revealed the voice stone, the small carved piece of dark stone with faint glowing lines that fit in the palm of his hand. The light in the chamber sharpened at once, and Nora, still unseen in the tunnel, froze for a moment as if she had just found the real shape of the trap. Damien said he had not stolen the voice stone. He said he had kept it safe after the city council hid it away. He said the old keepers had broken the system by dividing control and by refusing to face the deeper lock below. That was the first twist, clear and hard, because it meant Damien was not simply trying to take power. He was carrying proof that someone in Grayhaven had already been preparing for this moment, and that someone had trusted him with the one tool that could open the hidden systems below. Vance felt the room shift around that fact because it meant the past was not finished with them yet. Someone had planned for the Hartwell to wake, and someone had also expected a fight over who should command it. That made the chamber feel less like a room and more like the inside of a long waiting plan, and none of them liked being part of it. Suddenly the seam in the inner lock flared brighter, and a thin red line lit up across the dark metal rings. The deeper chamber had heard them, or perhaps the machine below had decided they were finally worth testing. The air dropped colder, and the floor gave a quiet hum, as if a great system under the city had shifted one step closer to full life. Vance understood then that the lock was not only sealed. It was thinking in the way old machines think, through rules, patterns, and hidden checks made to judge the living hands that reached for it. That mattered because if the wrong person forced it, the machine could shut the whole system down. If the right person opened it in the right way, Grayhaven might finally learn why it had been built in the dark at all. Vance lifted his chin and told Damien that taking control without understanding would only repeat the same mistake that had trapped the city for years. Damien answered with a cold smile and said understanding did not keep the lights on. Then the chamber shook again, and somewhere far below, a new metal sound rolled through the tunnels like a door unlocking inside another door. Nora had found something in the dark, and whatever she had seen was now moving the story forward without waiting for the rest of them. Grayhaven stayed cold and wet above the tunnels, even while the deep chambers below grew hotter with fear and movement. The city had been built over old stone and older metal, and every shaking wall reminded the people inside that they lived on top of something they never fully understood. Rain tapped against vents far above, weak red lamps glowed along the lower rails, and the whole place felt like it was holding its breath. Vance stood at the center of that pressure, a young man with black hair, gray eyes, and a dark long coat that hung heavy on his lean frame. Ash and rain still clung to his face, and his tired stare never left the chamber ahead. Beside him, Lena watched every corner with alert blue eyes, her blonde hair tied back tight, her short coat and utility straps ready for another rush into the dark. Marcus stood wide and solid near the broken rail line, a broad man with short brown hair, battle-scratched guard gear, and a heavy shield strapped across his back. Nora was already gone from sight, as silent and sharp as the shadows themselves. Damien Vale remained in the chamber with them, a tall man with brown hair, pale skin, and a calm posture that looked almost peaceful until anyone noticed how controlled it was. He wanted the Hartwell for one reason, and he had already made that reason clear. He believed Grayhaven could only survive if one strong hand guided the machine beneath it, even if that hand had to break every rule to do it. Vance knew the danger better than anyone now, because the city was not only failing above them, it was being pulled apart by the same kind of pride that had trapped it for years. Then the floor gave a hard jolt, the light strips flickered, and the new metal sound from below rolled through the tunnels again, deeper and clearer this time, like a giant door unlocking inside another giant door. Marcus braced himself against the wall and frowned. Lena looked toward the dark shaft and whispered that Nora had found something. Damien smiled with cold confidence and said that at least someone was finally making progress. Vance heard the mockery in that line, but he also heard the threat beneath it, because Damien did not care who found the path as long as he reached the end first. That was the first thing Vance had to stop, and he knew it now with painful clarity. If Damien reached the Hartwell without understanding it, Grayhaven would lose its last stable power route, and the wards above could fall into darkness. The lower tunnels could flood with broken heat, the lift lines could fail, and thousands of people could be left waiting in the dark for a rescue that never came. Vance moved first because waiting had already cost Grayhaven too much. He stepped toward the shaft with his coat swaying around his legs, and Lena caught his arm for a moment before letting go. Her face stayed calm, but her voice carried the strain she could not hide. She told him that Nora never made a sound unless she wanted someone to follow, and if she had pushed ahead alone, then whatever she found was too important to leave behind. Marcus checked the shield on his back and said the tunnels below were not safe for a straight march, because the old support lines had been shaking all night. Damien listened without looking worried, then placed one gloved hand on the dark stone device at his side. The voice stone was small, carved, and almost plain at first glance, but faint glowing lines moved through it like trapped light. It had been built to command the Hartwell and open hidden systems inside the machine, and that made it dangerous in the hands of anyone impatient enough to use it without care. Vance had seen how Damien held it, not like a tool, but like proof that the city should belong to him. That was what made him so hard to trust. He did not only want to save Grayhaven. He wanted to own the solution, control the fear, and become the only answer anyone could turn to when the lights failed. Damien told them all to move now, because every second spent arguing was another second the city above lost power. Vance answered that power without patience was just another trap, and he kept going before Damien could cut in again. They crossed into the narrow tunnel, and the air changed right away. It smelled of old metal, damp stone, and long unused oil. The walls carried faded markings from workers who had once kept the lower systems alive, and those markings now looked like warnings left by people who had seen the same mistakes before. As they descended, the shaking grew stronger, and the new sound below began to repeat in a slow pattern: open, turn, release, hold. Marcus said it sounded like a lock testing itself. Lena said it sounded like something waking up. Vance said it sounded like a warning. None of them were wrong. Nora found the source first, though no one saw her arrive. One moment the tunnel ahead was empty, and the next her dark hooded shape was waiting beside a split in the stone, her straight black hair falling around pale eyes that caught the weak light like cold glass. She wore layered cloth wraps and dark clothing that blended with the tunnel walls, and she moved like she had grown out of the dark rather than walked through it. In front of her stood a huge inner passage seal, old and deep in the machine network, with a red glowing line running through dark metal rings and ancient seams. It was the inner lock, a deeper chamber gate built to guard the main core and test whoever reached it. Nora had not opened it yet, but she had found the reason it was beginning to move. Along the edge of the lock sat a narrow panel covered in old carvings and faded control marks, and in the center of that panel was a second socket meant for the voice stone. That was the first twist, and it hit the group all at once. The Hartwell did not only have one command device. It had a hidden system, and the city workers who built the lower machine network had sealed it for a reason. Lena stepped closer, eyes wide, and realized the old records had been incomplete on purpose. Someone had removed the truth from the city long ago. Marcus asked who would do that, and Nora answered without looking back. She said the builders did it because the Hartwell had once overloaded the wards above, and the people in charge feared that raw power would destroy the city if the wrong hands reached it. Damien heard that and grew still, because the answer mattered more than any argument. Grayhaven had not been trapped by accident. It had been protected, hidden, and held together by people who knew the machine was too dangerous to use with blind force. That meant Damien was not the first man to think control would solve everything, but he might be the last one able to break the lock if nobody stopped him. Vance looked at the red line across the inner lock and understood the deeper danger. The lock was not just a wall, it was a test, and it was already judging them. If they failed, the Hartwell could seal deeper or release a surge none of them were ready for. If they passed, they might finally learn why the city had been built under layers of metal and silence. Damien stepped forward and said the answer was simple, because people needed light now, not old fear. He raised the voice stone toward the hidden socket, but Nora moved first and caught his wrist before the stone touched the panel. Her eyes stayed cold, and her voice was almost a whisper when she told him that the machine could read intent through the stone, and greedy hands had once locked the whole chamber for a reason. Damien pulled back, anger flashing for just a second, and that brief crack in his calm made him more dangerous than before. He asked whether Nora was helping them or protecting the dark. She answered that she was protecting the city from men who thought results mattered more than understanding. Vance stepped between them before the tension turned into a full clash. He told Damien that if the machine could read intent, then forcing it would only prove he was unfit to lead it. Damien stared at him with that same cold smile and said understanding did not keep the lights on. Then the chamber shook again, harder than before, and from the sealed passage came a long, low hum, like power building behind the metal. A hidden panel on the inner lock flashed once, then twice, and the red line along its edge shifted from dull crimson to bright warning light. Whatever Nora had found was no longer just a clue, it was reacting to them. The moment stretched sharp and still until a new sound cut through the hum from far inside the chamber network. It was not the lock this time, but something smaller and faster, like a latch releasing inside a moving frame. Lena turned her head toward the sound and pointed at a narrow service lift at the side wall. A faint lantern glow flickered there, and a breathless voice called up from below, thin and frightened and far too young for this deep place. A lower ward messenger climbed into view, a boy with dark rain-soaked hair, a thin build, and a worn coat that clung to him with tunnel water. His wide eyes snapped from face to face, and his whole body trembled from running too far through the dark. He was not supposed to be this deep in the machine network, and that alone made his arrival matter. He told them he had been sent from the lower ward gates with a message that could not wait for the guards, because the upper lifts had started to fail and the crowd above was panicking. More than that, he said the old city records had just been opened by mistake in a storage room near the ward office, and the pages inside showed maps that did not match the city people lived in now. They showed a second route under Grayhaven, one that bypassed the public power lines and ran straight toward the Hartwell. That revelation landed like a stone in still water. If someone had known this route all along, then the city leaders had either hidden it or never wanted it used. Damien asked who had touched the records, but the boy could only say that a sealed name appeared again and again in the margins, the name of an engineer who was supposed to have been gone for years. Marcus leaned in and muttered that no one just vanished from records without help. Vance felt the pieces click together in a way that made his stomach tighten. Grayhaven was not only losing power because of a broken machine. Someone had guided the city into ignorance, and the hidden root below might be the key to understanding who. Nora looked at the boy, then at the inner lock, and said the city was waking up to its own lies. Damien reached for the voice stone again, but now he was no longer hiding his impatience. He wanted the hidden root, the lock, and the power behind both, because he knew control would give him the upper hand. Vance saw that clearly now, and for the first time he did not only feel anger, he felt resolve. He told the others to hold position while Nora checked the panel and Marcus protected the tunnel behind them. Lena moved beside Vance and said quietly that if the boy was right, then the next chamber could change everything. Vance nodded, but he kept his eyes on Damien because the real danger was still standing in front of him. Somewhere below the inner lock, metal shifted again, and this time the sound was joined by a low pulse of blue light leaking through the seams. Grayhaven had begun to answer the secret call, and whatever was waiting on the other side was now close enough to feel. Vance tightened his grip, looked into the dark opening, and prepared to follow the truth deeper, even though he knew Damien would not make that choice easy. Grayhaven trembled under layers of stone and rusted iron, while rain kept falling through the broken streets above. Deep below the city, the air felt cold and old, and the blue light from the Heartwell moved through the tunnel walls like a slow, waking breath. Vance stood at the lip of the dark opening, with ash on his face and tired eyes locked forward, because he knew the truth was below and danger was still behind him. Damien Vale stood in the same chamber, calm and tall, with brown hair neat against his pale face, and with the kind of quiet control that made every room feel smaller. Vance was a young man with black hair, gray eyes, and a dark, long coat over fitted combat clothes, and he had come this far to protect Grayhaven from a hidden machine that could save the city or crush it. Damien was a man who wanted power, but not for greed alone, because he believed Grayhaven was too broken, too scared, and too divided to survive without one strong hand guiding it. That belief made him dangerous because he did not think he was a villain. He thought he was the only one brave enough to do what had to be done. The inner lock, with its thick rings and red glowing line, sat ahead like a sealed jaw, and the low pulse leaking from below told everyone that the Heartwell was not sleeping anymore. Something was waking inside it, and whatever it was, it had begun to answer the voice stone. Lena moved first, stepping out from the shadowed rail line with blonde hair tied back tight, blue eyes sharp, and practical lower ward clothing that had been worn hard by long nights in bad streets. She was not a soldier by pride, but by need, because she had spent her life in the lower wards watching strong men take too much and leave too little. What she wanted now was simple and urgent, since she wanted Grayhaven to stay free, and she wanted the people above and below to have a future that did not belong to Damien. Marcus came beside her, a broad man with short brown hair, a shield strapped to his back, and scratched guard gear that showed how many clashes he had already survived. He had once trusted the city guard to keep order, but he had learned that order meant nothing if the wrong person held the keys. Nora stayed farther back, silent and hard to notice, with straight black hair, pale eyes, and dark hooded clothing that let her move like a shadow through the tunnel lines. She knew the old service routes, the old locks, and the old lies, and that made her valuable because she could go where others could not. Then the lower ward messenger stumbled into the chamber, a thin boy with dark rain-soaked hair, a worn coat hanging off his shoulders, and frightened eyes that carried the panic of the streets above. He was breathless, and he mattered because he had seen the city changing in real time. He whispered that strange blue light had started shining through grates in the lower wards, and people were beginning to gather near the old power shafts because they could feel the machine waking under their feet. That news made the conflict clear at once. If the Heartwell fully opened under Damien control, Grayhaven might gain power, but it could also become trapped under one ruler who would decide who lived safely and who waited in the dark. Vance turned his gaze from the opening to Damien, because the real danger was still standing in front of him. Damien gave a small, cold smile, and he spoke with a voice that was calm enough to sound reasonable. He said the city was already collapsing in pieces, and that every district had its own fear, its own hunger, and its own people begging for someone to make hard choices. He said the Heartwell was never meant to be shared by weak hands, because a machine this old and this powerful would only turn the city against itself if too many people fought for it. Vance understood then that Damien was not trying to destroy Grayhaven. He was trying to own its survival. That made the situation worse, not better, because people like Damien always believed control was the same thing as safety. Marcus stepped forward and told Damien that no one man had the right to command a city buried under generations of sacrifice. Damien answered by reaching toward the voice stone in his coat, and the red line of the inner lock brightened as if the machine itself recognized his hand. Nora noticed the change first. She pointed to the seams in the metal wall where blue light now pulsed in short, steady beats, almost like a signal. The Hartwell was listening. Lena quickly explained what she had learned from the old records in the lower ward archive. Long ago, Grayhaven had been built around the Hartwell because the machine drew heat, light, and water from deep underground lines, but the system had a hidden rule. It would only fully open for a voice pattern that matched the original control stones. That was why the voice stone mattered, and that was why the machine had started responding now. Damien had not simply found the device. He had spent years looking for it because he believed the old city founders had hidden the truth on purpose, and he wanted to correct that mistake by forcing the machine back into motion. Then came the twist that changed everything. The messenger, shaking in place, spoke one more detail that he had heard from the street elders and the old tunnel workers. The Hartwell was not built only to power Grayhaven. It was also built to protect the city from a second system below it, a sealed emergency core that had once been used to shut down a collapse in the deep foundation. If that core ever opened without the right balance, the whole lower network could flood with power and fail at the same time. The city would not simply go dark. It would lose control over heat, water, and lift systems all at once, and thousands of people above would be trapped in freezing wards with no way to move supplies. Vance felt the weight of that truth hit him hard because this was no longer about one hidden machine. It was about the lives of everyone living above it. Damien heard the same warning, but he did not step back. He only asked whether Vance finally understood why the city needed a firm hand. He said the lower wards would panic, the upper wards would hoard, and the guard would split if the truth spread too quickly. He claimed that fear made people selfish, and selfish people ruined systems like the Hartwell. His motive was now fully clear. Damien wanted the machine because he feared chaos more than he feared control, and he was willing to place the whole city under his command to prevent a collapse he believed was unavoidable. Vance wanted to answer, but before he could, the inner lock gave a heavy mechanical shift, and the red line along its edge broke into a blue pulse that raced around the chamber rings. The metal doors inside the seal began to turn, not fully open, but enough to show a narrow crack of deeper darkness. From that crack came a low sound, not a roar, but a steady hum that felt like a giant heart finding its beat after a long sleep. Everyone froze, even Damien looked briefly surprised because the machine was moving on its own now, and that meant the old rules were changing. Vance stepped closer to the crack, careful and focused, while Lena and Marcus moved to his sides without needing to speak. Nora slipped behind a broken control rail and studied the wall seams, looking for the smallest safe path forward. The messenger backed away, clutching his coat shut as the blue light brightened across his face. Damien lifted the voice stone and held it near the inner lock, but the machine did not fully accept him. Instead, the lines on the stone flared once, then dimmed, as if the Hartwell was measuring him and finding him incomplete. That small failure mattered more than any loud threat could have, because it showed that Damien wanted control, but the machine wanted something else. Lena saw it first and said the old records had hinted at a second requirement. The Hartwell did not obey only command. It also tested intent. The original builders had feared exactly the kind of man Damien had become, so they had tied the deeper systems to trust, balance, and shared access. Damien narrowed his eyes, and for the first time his calm expression cracked. He had always believed the machine should obey the strongest voice, but now the machine was refusing to treat strength as the same thing as worth. Vance understood the meaning at once. He was not the only one able to open the next layer. He was the one willing to do it without taking the city for himself. That understanding changed his posture because he was no longer just fighting for information. He was choosing what kind of protector he wanted to become. He told the others to stay ready, and he said the next door was not just a lock, but a judgment. Then the blue light inside the crack flared wider, and a deeper chamber began to reveal itself below, where old metal rails descended into a hidden dark space. Vance took one careful step forward, with Damien still beside him and still dangerous, while the chamber around them shook with the first full breath of the Hartwell awakening. The next truth was waiting below, and Grayhaven had already started to answer it. Grayhaven sat above the dark earth like a city holding its breath, with rain tapping the stone roofs and old pipes humming under the streets. The upper wards were crowded and tired, the lower tunnels were damp and narrow, and every alley seemed to carry the worry of people who knew the ground beneath them was never fully safe. Under all of that, deep inside the buried metal body of the Hartwell, Vance stood at the edge of a discovery that could save the city or break it apart. He was a young man with black hair, gray eyes, and a dark long coat over fitted combat clothes with rain and ash on his face, and he had come this far because he wanted one simple thing: a future where Grayhaven did not have to fear the dark below. Beside him stood Damien Vale, a man with brown hair, pale skin, sharp features, and a long dark coat with clean lines, his calm posture hiding a cold mind that wanted control more than peace. Lena was there too, a woman with blonde hair tied back tight, alert blue eyes, and practical lower ward clothing, because she had spent her life reading danger before it struck, and because she believed the city only survived when ordinary people refused to look away. Marcus, a man with short brown hair, a broad muscular build, and city guard gear with a heavy shield on his back, stood ready with the look of a protector who had already seen too much. Nora, a woman with straight black hair, pale eyes, and dark hooded clothing with layered cloth wraps, moved near the shadows like a silent promise, because she believed secrets should be used carefully, not worshipped. Above them somewhere in the city, a lower ward messenger, a thin boy with dark rain-soaked hair and a worn rain-dark coat, had already brought the warning that made this descent urgent, saying the upper streets had begun to tremble and the old power lines were flickering like frightened nerves. The central danger was clear now, because if the Hartwell fully woke in the wrong hands, Grayhaven would not simply lose power, it would lose its future. Damien had always wanted the city to bend to a single hand, and that motive now hung over every step like a blade that had not yet fallen. Then the blue light inside the crack widened, the deeper chamber opened below, and the old metal rails descended into a hidden dark space that looked less like a room and more like a test prepared by someone who expected lies. Vance took one careful step forward, while Damien stayed close enough to be helpful and dangerous at the same time, and the chamber around them shook with the first full breath of the Hartwell awakening. The air changed first, growing colder and carrying a dry metal smell that made everyone tense their shoulders. The blue panels on the walls flickered one after another, and old control seams along the floor lit up in thin lines that traced a path deeper down. Marcus moved his shield off his back and held it ready, because his duty was to keep the group standing even when fear tried to knock them down. Lena looked at the rails and then at the walls, and her quick eyes caught something important: tiny carved marks cut into the metal in repeating sets of 3. She told the others that the chamber was not only a passage, it was a measured gate, and that the Hartwell was trying to judge whoever entered by watching how they moved, what they touched, and whether they acted with patience or greed. That mattered because the city above had always treated the Hartwell like a dead machine, but this place clearly remembered every hand that had ever tried to command it. Nora slid a small carved device from under her layered wraps, the voice stone, a dark stone control piece with faint glowing lines, and the instant she held it near the nearest seam, the lines on its surface answered the chamber lights. It was built to command the Hartwell and unlock hidden systems, but it was not a key that anyone could use carelessly. Nora had brought it because she knew the old network could not be forced open, only spoken to in the right order, and because she feared what would happen if Damien got to the core first. Damien watched the voice stone with clear interest, and his cold confidence finally cracked just enough to show hunger. He said the city had suffered long enough under weak hands, and that the Hartwell should be guided by someone who could make hard choices without hesitation. Vance answered him by asking whether hard choices were the same as selfish choices, and that simple question made the air feel heavier. Damien did not deny his desire because he did not think desire was a flaw. He believed Grayhaven was full of fear, and he believed fear could be ruled better than it could be healed. That belief was his motive, and it made sense in a twisted way because he had watched the wards struggle for years, and he had decided that mercy without power could never survive. The first lock in the chamber shifted with a deep grinding sound, and a red line appeared across a huge inner door below, the inner lock, thick with dark metal rings and ancient seams. A low voice came from the metal itself, not a person but a machine memory speaking through old channels, and it said the next door was not a lock but a judgment. Vance felt that warning in his chest because judgment meant the chamber would not open for strength alone. It would open for truth, for trust, and for the one who was willing to place the city above personal pride. That was the first clear test, and everyone understood it at once. They descended the rails together, one careful step at a time, and every step made the Hartwell hum louder. The deeper chamber was wider than the first, with thick housing panels above them and long blue strips of light running along the walls like awake veins. At the far end stood the inner lock, a massive ring of black metal around a sealed central seam, and the red line across it pulsed like a warning that had been waiting for years. Lena examined the floor and found pressure points that would likely trigger if the wrong person rushed ahead, so she signaled for everyone to slow down. Marcus stayed close to Vance, not because he liked rules, but because he knew a city guard had to protect people who kept moving when others froze. Nora moved into the darker edge of the room, her black hair hidden under her hood, and she studied the old seams for hidden channels that could reveal the lock order. The chamber gave her a chance to see what others missed, and what she noticed made her pull back in silence. The Heartwell was not only powered by a dormant core, it was built around layered systems that could be opened only in sequence, as if the machine had been made to test the morality of its leaders again and again. That revelation changed the meaning of everything, because Grayhaven had not simply inherited an old power source, it had inherited a machine that wanted proof before it would serve. Then the voice stone began to glow brighter in Nora's hand, and thin lines of light spread through the floor toward the inner lock. The chamber responded, but not fully. A hidden panel opened on the side wall, and from within it came a narrow platform with old markings and a second inscription that no one expected. Lena read it aloud, and the words said that power given without shared trust would turn the whole city into a cage. Everyone went still because the message did not sound like a warning left by a stranger. It sounded like a warning left by someone who had known Grayhaven would one day be tempted by the wrong kind of leader. Damien stepped forward before the others could think too long, and he said the inscription was proof that the old builders had been weak, because they had left their city open to endless hesitation. He wanted to touch the lock directly, and Vance blocked him. Their eyes met, and in that moment the real conflict came into full view, because both men wanted the same machine for very different reasons. Vance wanted the city to choose its own future, while Damien wanted to decide that future for everyone else. Their tension did not come from simple jealousy or anger, but from two opposite ideas about safety. Damien believed one strong hand could stop chaos, while Vance believed trust and shared burden were the only things strong enough to last. The chamber seemed to listen to them, and then the red line across the inner lock pulsed again, as if the machine itself had chosen to force their argument into action. A side alarm began to sound in a slow, deep tone, and far above them, through the metal walls, Grayhaven answered with distant shaking. The city was waking in pieces, and the deeper they went, the more people above would feel the strain. Then the twist came, sharp and clear, when Nora finally matched the voice stone to the hidden panel, and the Heartwell showed a memory from long ago. The blue light filled the chamber, and for one brief moment everyone saw the image of the first builders standing before the same lock, not as conquerors but as protectors. They had built the Heartwell to power Grayhaven, yes, but they had also built the judgment system to stop any ruler from turning the city into a prison. That was the true reason for the tests. The machine had been designed to reject leaders who sought control without consent. Damien saw the memory and realized with visible anger that the Heartwell would never simply obey him if he tried to force it. He had hoped the hidden power would answer the strongest will, but instead it answered honesty, patience, and shared purpose. That realization made him more dangerous, not less, because now he knew he could not win by pretending to be the rightful guide. He would have to break the trust of the others or seize the system before it judged him. Vance understood this at once, and he felt the weight of the choice settle into him. He was tired, wounded, and scared, but he also saw that the city above could not be saved by one person acting alone. So he turned to Lena, Marcus, and Nora and asked them to stand with him not as helpers, but as equals. That small choice mattered more than any weapon, because it showed he had changed from a man chasing a path through the dark into a leader willing to share the burden. Lena placed her hand on the voice stone, Marcus planted his feet beside the lock, and Nora kept the lines stable with careful control of the hidden seams. Together they formed the pattern the chamber wanted, and the red line across the inner lock began to soften. Damien, however, stepped aside into the shadows, his face calm again, and that calm was worse than anger. He had not given up. He had only learned that the next move would need patience and deception. The inner lock did not open fully, but it shifted, and from the seam behind it came a low blue pulse that rolled through the rails beneath their feet. The Heartwell was answering them, but only halfway, as if it wanted to see whether they would hold together before granting the next truth. Far above, the messenger boy in the lower ward would soon be carrying new warnings through the rain, and the city above would soon feel the deeper stir of power running under its streets. Vance looked toward the dark opening ahead where another chamber waited beyond the softened lock, and he knew this was not the end of the descent. It was the start of the hardest part because the machine had accepted their presence but not yet their right to command it. And somewhere in the dark beside him, Damien Vale was already planning how to turn that unfinished judgment into his own advantage. The chamber ahead sat in heavy silence, deep under Grayhaven, where wet stone, old metal, and faint blue light made the air feel tight and cold. The Hartwell still hummed around them, low and steady, like a giant thing that had just opened one eye and was waiting to see who would blink first. Vance stood in front of the dark opening, with rain still on his black hair and ash still on his face, while his tired gray eyes watched every shadow. He was young, lean, and worn down by too many hard choices, but he still carried the one thing the others needed most, which was the will to keep going when fear tried to stop them. Behind him, Lena waited close to the wall, a blonde woman with tight tied-back hair, alert blue eyes, and a practical short coat that had already picked up dust from the lower tunnels. She wanted to keep the city safe, and she did not trust easy answers. Marcus stood near her, a broad, muscular man with short brown hair and city guard gear scratched by earlier clashes, his heavy shield strapped to his back. He wanted order, and he wanted to bring everyone home. Nora moved near the edge of the light, a slim woman with straight black hair, pale eyes, and dark hooded clothing that blended into the shadows. She wanted the truth because she had spent too many years listening from the dark while other people made the rules. And then there was Damien Vale, a tall man with brown hair, pale skin, and a calm cold stare, wearing a long dark coat with sharp clean lines. He wanted control not because he loved power for its own sake, but because he believed only his hand could keep Grayhaven from falling apart. That was the lie he told others, and maybe the lie he told himself. The problem was simple now, and everyone felt it. The Hartwell had accepted them, but it had not yet accepted their right to command it, and if the next chamber rejected them, the whole buried system could surge out of balance and send a wave of unstable power up into the city above. That would mean broken light lines, dark wards, and panic in the streets, and the city already lived too close to fear. Vance looked into the opening and knew they had reached the place where the machine would choose between trust and force. Before anyone moved, a sharp sound echoed from the rear tunnel, and a lower ward messenger stumbled into the chamber, soaked through and shaking. He was a thin boy with dark rain-soaked hair, a worn rain-dark coat, and wide, frightened eyes that made him look younger than he was. He had been sent from the city above with one job, which was to bring urgent news before the next power shift reached the upper wards. He gasped for breath and said that the eastern power lines in Grayhaven had begun to flicker, and that whole blocks were already feeling strange pulses through the floors and walls. People were gathering in the streets, frightened and angry, because they thought the guards had hidden the truth from them. Marcus cursed under his breath because he knew that if the city lost trust now, order would break faster than any metal beam. Lena knelt beside the boy at once, speaking in a calm voice and asking how long they had before the pulse spread farther. The boy said maybe 1 hour, maybe less, and that answer made the whole chamber feel smaller. Damien listened without surprise, and that calm alone made him seem more dangerous. He said the machine was already reacting, which meant the next chamber was the key point. If they could reach the main core and link the voice stone, then they could direct the energy safely. But if they failed, the Hartwell would likely keep choosing for itself, and Grayhaven would pay the price. He made it sound like a warning, but his eyes kept slipping toward the small carved stone in Vance's hand. The voice stone was dark and worn, with faint glowing lines, and it had been built to command the Hartwell and unlock hidden systems. It was the only thing they had found that could speak the old language of the machine. Vance felt its weight in his palm and wondered why the Hartwell had let him keep holding it. That question had followed him for hours. It followed him now. Nora noticed something in the wall seem near the inner lock and moved closer without a sound. She brushed dust from an old panel and found a thin mark hidden beneath the grime, a mark that matched the lines on the voice stone. That was the first real twist of the night. The chamber did not wait for just any leader. It had been built around a pattern, a family line, and a vow made long ago by the first builders of Grayhaven. Nora read the old panel slowly, and with each word the truth grew clearer. The Hartwell had not been made only to power the city. It had been made to protect it from outside collapse, and its deepest systems would respond only to a true keeper, someone chosen by blood and burden, not by force or ambition. Vance froze when he heard that, because the mark on the panel matched a scar line hidden under his sleeve, one he had carried since childhood and never understood. He had always thought it was nothing more than an old wound. Now it looked like proof. Damien heard the same truth, and for the first time his cold expression shifted. He had built his whole plan on the idea that skill and pressure would be enough to take control, but the machine had rules deeper than his pride. He asked Nora if she was sure, and she answered yes with a steady voice that left no room for comfort. That was when Damien made his choice. He stepped back, raised his hand toward the side control rail, and tried to force the voice stone into the outer panel before Vance could react. His goal was clear. He wanted to override the proper line, trigger a partial command, and use the unstable pulse to make the machine obey him through fear. He did not care if the system cracked a little, as long as he gained the upper hand first. Marcus moved fast and blocked him with a hard shove of the shoulder, while Lena snapped the messenger boy behind cover. The chamber filled with a deep blue thrum as warning lights flared along the old metal housing. The inner lock began to wake fully, and the red line across its face lit up like a narrow wound of fire. Damien did not retreat. He pulled free and spoke with a harsh, low voice, saying that waiting would doom the city and that only strong action could save it. He truly believed that, and that was what made him so hard to stop. He was not lying about the danger. He was lying about his right to answer it alone. Vance saw that clearly now. He stepped forward, held the voice stone tight, and told Damien to stand down. Damien replied that Vance was too tired, too soft, and too slow to make a hard choice. Then Nora did something no one expected. She moved behind Damien, drew a narrow control shard from her sleeve, and jammed it into the side seam that she had found earlier. The hidden seam opened with a hiss, and an old bridge line dropped down between the team and the inner lock. Nora had not been looking for power. She had been looking for a way around pride. That one move changed the shape of the room. The machine responded to the hidden line, not to Damien and not to raw force. A deep voice, more like stone moving than a person speaking, rolled through the chamber and asked for the keeper to step forward. Vance felt his heart pound as the blue lights climbed higher across the walls. The others looked at him, and for the first time they did not just see the tired fighter or the stubborn leader. They saw the one the machine had been waiting for, yet the moment did not become simple. The inner lock had awakened, and the red line on its face was now splitting into 3 bright paths, each one leading toward a different branch of the buried system. Lena said that meant the machine was dividing its power roots. Marcus said that if they picked wrong, the city could lose the lower ward grid. Nora said the old builders must have hidden a test inside the lock, one meant to judge the keeper under pressure. Damien, now half in shadow, watched all of it and understood that he had been outplayed for the first time. His cold face tightened, but he still did not give up. He turned his attention to the messenger boy instead, because he knew frightened people could be pushed where proud people could not. In a soft voice, he told the boy that the upper streets would blame the guards if the power failed, and that Vance would not be able to protect everyone alone. The boy looked ready to run. Vance saw the fear spread and knew Damien was trying to split them at the exact moment unity mattered most. So Vance made his own change. He did not yell, he did not threaten. He spoke to the boy first, then to Marcus, then to Lena, and finally to Nora, saying that none of them could carry Grayhaven alone, and that the machine would not be solved by one strong hand. He admitted that he had spent too much of his life trying to prove he could stand alone, and that had made him easy to corner. Now he understood that the Hartwell wanted more than a commander. It wanted a keeper, someone who listened to the whole system and trusted the people around him. That admission settled over the chamber like a quiet hand. Marcus stepped beside him. Lena placed one hand on the panel and said she would guide the current patterns. Nora pointed to the hidden line and said she could keep the seam open. Even the messenger boy stopped shaking, because for the first time he felt part of something bigger than fear. Damien saw the team closing ranks and his face went still again, but this time the stillness looked sharper than before. He was not beaten yet, he simply found a new angle. He slipped back into the darker edge of the chamber, where a second control rail waited behind a curtain of pipes, and he studied it with the same cold focus he had used on every plan before. Vance noticed him, but the inner lock was already calling now, and the 3 red paths were beginning to pulse in different rhythms. The keeper test had started, and the next choice would not be about strength alone. It would be about trust, memory, and the city itself. Grayhaven above them gave one long rumble, as if the streets were waking in their sleep. Deep under the city, the Hartwell opened its next level, and Vance took one step toward the inner chamber, knowing that Damien Vale was still close behind, and that the hardest part had only just begun. The chamber opened into a vast dark hall where blue light moved under iron walls. Grayhaven still trembled above them, and the old machine below answered with low, patient power. Vance stood at the edge of the next path, his black hair wet with rain and ash, while Damien Vale watched from behind with calm, cold eyes. The keeper test was no longer about force. It was about who could guide the Heartwell without breaking the city that depended on it. Lena ran in first, her blonde hair tied tight, her blue eyes sharp with fear and purpose. Marcus followed, broad-shouldered and steady, with his heavy shield ready on his back. Nora slipped out of the shadows next, her straight black hair hidden by dark wraps, and her quiet voice told the truth that no one wanted to hear. The Heartwell had 3 inner locks, and each lock would answer only to a memory that the city had chosen to hide. Damien had wanted that secret all along, because if he controlled the Heartwell, he could control Grayhaven. The first lock rose as a red ring of metal, and the voice stone in Vance's hand began to glow. He pressed it forward, and the machine showed him a memory of the lower wards, where children waited in dark halls for power and warmth. Then the second lock opened only when Lena spoke of the first tunnels, where she and Vance had once promised to protect the city together. The third lock demanded truth, and Vance finally understood the twist. The city had not been built to obey one ruler. It had been built so many voices could share its strength, because no single person could be trusted with all of it. Damien stepped in at last, confident and unshaken, and he tried to seize the voice stone. He said control was the only way to save Grayhaven, but the chamber showed his fear too, because he wanted power to stop the city from ever rejecting him again. Vance did not fight with anger. He shared the stone with Lena, Marcus, and Nora, and their voices joined together as one clear command. The inner lock opened wide, the red light faded, and the Heartwell woke in full balance. Power returned to the upper streets, the lower wards steadied, and Damien was driven back by the force of a system that would not bend to greed. Vance looked up as the city settled around him, and he was no longer the tired man who had entered alone. He had become the one who understood that trust could hold a whole world together.